Hello everyone. So, I know this isn't normally a political channel, but I've decided as part of a class project to interview Jeff Whitfield, the Democratic nominee for my local state representative in Texas House District 92. Now, Texas House District 92 is located in the Mid-Cities area between Dallas and Fort Worth and includes cities of Bedford, Euless, Hurst, and parts of Arlington and Grand Prairie. Now, Jeff was kind enough to let me record and post our discussion online. So in the following presentation, you're going to be seeing us talk about issues facing our community and our country, as well as the legalization of marijuana in Texas. So let's get started. I'm Carlos Hidalgo, and
I am Jeff Whitfield, and this is Phenom Philosophy.
Are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right. So, hello everyone. I'm Carlos Hidalgo, and I'm here with the Democratic nominee for State Representative District 92. I'm here with Jeff Whitfield. It's great to have you, Jeff. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me, Carlos.
Yeah, this is great. So for those that don't know you, why don't you go ahead and give us a short synopsis of just exactly who Jeff Whitfield is?
Obviously, it's hard to completely convey who you are in a brief summary, but I'm glad to give you a little thumbnail sketch and invite people to visit my website to learn more, which is whitfieldfortexas.com. But I guess very quickly, I am the Democratic candidate for Texas House District 92, which includes the cities of Hurst, Euless, Bedford, parts of Arlington, parts of Fort Worth, and parts of Grand Prairie. I grew up in the mid-cities as a kid. Before we started recording, you referenced the fact you'd seen my website with my photo of my time on the Halton football team. We moved here from Abilene when I was about 5. My dad was looking for work as manufacturing collapsed in Abilene and in other places, and he was fortunate to find work with Ben Hogan Golf Equipment here in Tarrant County. And then my mom was a hairdresser, has been all my life, and she cut hair primarily in Hurst, Euless, and Bedford, here in the mid-cities where she had salons. She was a substitute cosmetology teacher for the HEB schools. And I am a product of Birdville schools, went to Birdville schools all the way through. Spent a lot of time in my mom's hair salons when I was out of school. So I felt like, you hear people talk about sometimes in politics, certain issues are kitchen table issues. I often think about the issues that I hear most people talking about as hair salon issues. These are the things that I would hear people talk about in my mom's salons, and we'll get into this later, I know, but it's the real issues that I think are driving us in this campaign, because it's what we're hearing about from our neighbors, just like I've heard about them all my life in my mom's salons. So a product of this community, my teachers, neighbors, church, inspired me to a lifetime of service. And that started at the Air Force Academy. So I left here, went to the Air Force Academy, from which I graduated as a distinguished graduate, and then went and served our country in the Air Force for 6 years on active duty. After my active duty, I was honored by our country to be selected as a Fulbright scholar. Went to England, and I studied international conflict negotiations with the former Foreign Secretary of England for a couple of years. After that, I realized that law was a skill that I believed it was essential to have because of all the things I worked on and seen in my time in the military, as well as my international negotiation work. So came back to Texas, studied at UT Law School down in Austin, was very fortunate to work as a legislative aide for Senator John Whitmire, the longest serving senator in Texas, while I was in law school, so that was a part-time job. And then after law school, I went and worked with the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague, Netherlands, helping prosecute war criminals from the Balkan conflict. After my time there, I came back to the United States. I was a clerk to a judge on one of our highest appellate courts, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then after that clerkship, working with the judge, crafting law, I then, crafting legal opinions, I should say, which is basically one and the same, came back to Texas and have been a lawyer and a community servant ever since. My wife also grew up here, And so once we had served our country abroad and in other places, we knew this is where we wanted to come. And so we came back here to be near our family and raise our son, which we're doing now. So that's sort of a bio sketch of me. I'd say in terms of my family, working class family, folks who just instilled in all of the younger generation this desire to do our best and to make the world a little better. Sometimes just by being kind to the people around us, sometimes by diving in and making an impact where we can. So that's what I'm trying to do, in every way that I can find to do that.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And that's really great, especially for people that, may not know you or may not even be interested in local politics. That's the point of this interview, is to really, give you a platform and let people hear, what you have to say and the things that you stand for and just who you are as a person. So going on to issues, what is the issue that you're the most passionate or the most concerned about, just as an individual?
Yeah, and I'd say that I'm fortunate because you're asking me as an individual, but I spend a lot of my time thinking about what it would be to be the representative. So I'm lucky that those things align, because the things that I believe are important happen to be the same sort of things that I know our community finds important, the same sort of things that I hear people talking about. First and foremost is, a great quality education for our next generation. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that nothing that I've achieved in life would have happened had it not been for a good solid education. Check out right here in this community. So we have to protect our public schools. We have to protect our educational system, not only just for the substance of those core subjects that we all think about, but for our civics education. Literally the schools are crafting our citizenry and crafting those who will save our democracy for future generations. So education is key. Second, I would say, is access to quality, affordable healthcare. I mean, we have the highest level of uninsured people in the country right here in Texas. Those people are scared, and they're suffering, and their children are suffering because they're basically, if they're lucky, putting together a patchwork of services where they can. But not only is it terrible because of that lack of care, but for those who do go and get care, they're rushing to emergency rooms. They're rushing to county hospitals, and that's having a real impact on our economy and our healthcare system. So the healthcare structure in Texas is really flawed, both from a moral standpoint. It's just not right, and from an economic standpoint, it's just, it's economically irresponsible for us to just expect people to go get their care from emergency rooms. So access to quality, affordable healthcare. It's also a very personal subject to me. When I was at the Air Force Academy getting fantastic care provided by our government, my dad lost his job. My mom had a terrible heart issue, and they didn't have health care, because when you lose your job, like most folks, you lose your health care. And so there my parents were, worried about not having money, no job, worried about health care. And just seeing them go through that really changed the way that I perceived our structure. And then third, I'd say the third issue is people have to have decent jobs that give them an opportunity to contribute to society with a reasonable wage. And so our economic recovery has to be another focus for us. So I think that'd be sort of the third thing on my mind, is an environment where small and mid-sized businesses can continue generating those jobs that they've done so well throughout American history. So those are the three issues that are really top of mind for me.
For sure. And, especially given the global pandemic, those seem to be three issues that are extremely important to people right now, with schools offering online classes, needing support for that, people, needing healthcare, and the economic downturn due to the pandemic. What do you notice most in District 92, as a result of the pandemic? What do you think we really need to focus on, and what do you think you could really help with in the House of Representatives?
Well, and Carlos, I don't know if you've seen this in the people that you grew up with here, or family and such, but people are really, they're scared and they're hurting. Some folks are losing their jobs. Some folks, even if they haven't lost their jobs, they're worried about whether their job will continue to be there for them. So I think there's genuinely a concern about the state of the economy. People are also concerned about public health. I mean, they're afraid of getting sick, or if they feel young and healthy, getting those that they love who might be vulnerable sick. So people are concerned about that. And sadly, we live in a time where there are people for political purposes, just because they want to get elected or stay elected, they are going to minimize the threat of COVID. They're going to push back against the scientifically proven effectiveness of vaccinations. And we have to make sure that we stand up and call them out. You're studying philosophy, you're working at grad school, you understand the importance of science and relying on experts. And so I think, what I'd say is, here in this district, the people here are ready for a representative who is going to listen to science, listen to evidence, and try to advocate for policies that are going to sustain our economy, protect the health and well-being of our people. And that's what I promise to do. You're not going to get some fringe political ideology from me that tries to score points by saying that I don't believe in science, or I don't believe COVID is dangerous, or I don't think vaccinations are effective. I'm just going to be focused on trying to make sure that our folks can have the jobs and the health care and the education that they need and they deserve.
That's great. That's great. And now we're going to move on to talk about the election. And I think we can start by talking about the current Representative Jonathan Stickland. How do you think that he has accurately reflected the views of the community? In 2018, he won with 49.8% of the vote. And that's a very narrow margin, only winning by about 1,400 votes. Do you think that he's accurately reflected the views of the community?
I'll tell you what I hear from the people that are here in the community, right? So there is one common chorus, whether they are Democratic voices, whether they are Republican voices, whether they are independent voices. And what they're saying is, we need a representative who is going to listen to the things we're concerned about and go down to Austin and advocate for us, because they don't feel that they've had that. And that's what people are telling me. The fact that I get calls from the Republican Party, from folks who are associated with the Republican Party, tells me that they have not been satisfied with the representative that carries their label. And it also tells me that they're willing to look beyond party labels for someone who is service-minded, someone who's going to put service before self, service before party. I know that our community is tired of sort of being thought of as held hostage by some special interests in another part of the state. The fact that Empower Texas is often talked about in this community by regular folks who shouldn't have to know about some billionaires in West Texas who have had that kind of influence. People here in the mid-cities are ready for a representative that's going to be focused on them, and that's what I will be.
That's great. And just to share a little anecdote, I think I have a friend of mine who's very, very conservative, and when he became of voting age, his parents, who are also very conservative, they were like, giving him a little bit of advice, and they were saying like, okay, well, we typically vote Republican, except Jonathan Stickland, and I thought that was interesting because, some people see him to be the most conservative politician in Texas, and so I thought it would be interesting to hear if he actually reflects the views of Republicans in District 92 and such.
Sounds like our friend's experience mirrors the experiences that I've heard from a lot of our neighbors. Yeah,
for sure. So And given that he's won by a narrow margin, I think that you're definitely in a position where you can be confident that the district could flip, this election cycle. But are you concerned with the third-party candidates in such a close race and the impact that they might have?
No, I wouldn't say concerned. I'm glad that we have a political system where people can participate. And if there are people, as obviously there are, who don't feel that they can find what they need in the Democratic or Republican candidate, if they choose to look to one of those other candidates, I think that's a right that they have. So I think that if you look at the numbers here and you look at sort of the way that the Republican incumbents margin of error, his winning margin kept getting smaller and smaller year after year. And then you look at the massive turnout in the primary, unprecedented number of Democrats turned out to vote. And that was before the pandemic. Now, what really blew my mind was that in the runoff, in the primary runoffs, in the middle of the pandemic, there were more voters that turned out for a runoff than we've had in, I want to say, almost a decade. I mean, it was a huge turnout in a runoff. And that tells me, like you commonly hear in the news, people will crawl over broken glass to vote. I think there is a passion on the Democratic side this year to get out and express their perspective. And they feel that, for too long, the Republican Party or candidates wearing that label have held all the offices, all the major offices in the state, and they're unhappy with the way things are. So they're ready for a change, and they're gonna find that change in Democratic candidates like me here in House District 92. So I'm confident that if we keep doing the work, which we're doing, talking to voters, listening to voters, and encouraging them to get out and participate, that we will win this seat.
That's great. That's great to hear. And like you said before, a lot of the issues that you are most concerned about, most passionate about, are being greatly affected by the pandemic. But now I want to move away from some of those issues. And one thing that's been talked about, sort of, I think that's kind of been under the radar, especially in Texas, is the legalization of marijuana. So I just have a short blip here. So the 21st Amendment to repeal the prohibition of alcohol was a response not only to the organized crime in the 20s, but to counteract the effects of the Great Depression. Do you think that the same could be done with marijuana amidst the COVID crisis?
It's interesting how often I've heard this issue come up, especially once that the state has recognized this almost $5 billion revenue gap that they'll have in the next biennium. And so I'm hearing a lot of people talk about a lot of different paths to increase revenue. And that's really what the state should be focused on, how we can increase revenue to provide those essential services like schools and healthcare and economic recovery. What I'd say is that, if elected or when elected, I would be open to studying the laws that other states have enacted, just so we can see if they make economic sense here, as so long as we can also successfully maintain the rule of law in our state. So I think there's a lot of states that have already moved down that path, and I'm interested to learn from both their good and the bad of what they've experienced.
For sure. The Texas Speaker of the House has even been quoting as saying that it could certainly be a help. And so legalization of marijuana is something that should be considered next session by those that want to bring it forward. And so we're already seeing this sort of maybe not necessarily a push, but a move towards legalization. Do you think that it's perhaps inevitable at some point in Texas?
It's hard to say anything is inevitable, but I do think that the fact that you're hearing lots of people talk about the need to look for increased revenue, revenue from new sources, none of us want to impose, the idea of putting more taxes on people and the fact that our tax structure is what it is. those who represent their community have to be mindful that, you know, there's certainly, if there are places to increase revenue, then we should study them. So, you know, I don't know that I'd say inevitable, but I would say that I'm confident that a lot of attention will be paid to any avenue to bring new revenues into the state, including some form of marijuana sales. I'm sure that there'll be lots of studies into that.
For sure. I was watching a video on YouTube about what Americans get wrong about national health care. And one thing that was proposed at the end of the video was perhaps we should be going about healthcare similarly to how we go about marijuana. So this individual states legalize it, and eventually growing positive sentiment will go and hopefully, supposedly, trickle up to the federal level and lead to a federal legalization. Do you think the same could be done about healthcare, as for individual states sort of enacting their own sort of healthcare systems, and that would eventually trickle up to a sort of national healthcare system?
You know, I definitely think that even if you talk to our doctors, you know, the doctors who are their front lines of our healthcare system, they'll express concerns about the way the structure is, and they're looking to our state to make changes where they can. And, you know, the state only has certain powers, federal government has certain powers, local municipalities have certain powers. So when it's something as important as healthcare, I think no option should be off the table. You should talk about every possibility. You should study not only other states and federal government, but you should study other countries to see how their systems have found efficiencies, and not only efficiencies in cost, but efficiencies in service. I mean, you should, I think, as a state representative, I'm interested in learning as much as I can about what works and what doesn't work, so that I can then advocate for improvements in our systems, especially on those issues that everybody cares most about, but on everything. I think, you know, we have a sacred trust to use our state's revenues responsibly. And in doing that, I intend to like we said much earlier in this conversation, follow the science, follow the evidence, and be respectful with the revenue that we are given to provide essential services to people in Texas.
That's great. Last few questions. What do you think that you offer the community that and the state that your opponent, Jeff Kaysen, doesn't? You know, I've seen his signs around that says businessman, not politician. And that, you know, I think the first thing that came to mind was that was the presidential promise of 2016. And, you know, you know, think what you want about the president, you know, we're kind of in this place we are right now. And, you know, personally, I don't find myself, you know, comfortable with that same mentality, especially, you know, with him sort of echoing the president and things like that. So what do you think that you have to offer the community that your opponent doesn't?
Well, I think, you know, first, just as a side note, I think it's interesting that he declares himself not a politician, considering that he has served on the Bedford City Council, and he ran and lost quite significantly for this very same seat back in 2010. So I know it kind of sounds like a politician to me, but this is my first time to run for office. And I respect our business community very much. I myself am a small business owner here in Tarrant County, and I understand that that businesses bring an important perspective. But so do military veterans, so do teachers, so do doctors, so do retail workers and union members. There's a lot of voices to be heard. What I will bring to this position, that a couple of things that my opponent can't bring. One is I have vast experience in understanding the law and crafting the law and fighting in court for law. I mean, there's only of the two candidates in this race, only one of us has sworn multiple times to support and defend the Constitution and the laws of this country and state, and that's me. As a military officer, I swore to support and defend the Constitution and laws of our country. As a clerk to a federal court judge, I swore to uphold and defend the laws of our country. As a lawyer, I've sworn to support and defend the laws and the Constitution of Texas. And specifically, I did the law as a lawyer. I've worked in the legislature, working to achieve compromise on these critical issues so we get things done instead of just gridlock, get things done for our people. I have fought in court over the constitutionality of laws to make sure that our laws are upheld. So when I get to Austin, I'll actually be able to do the job and understand the importance of law and the importance of our system to protecting people. It's not just like these things happen in Austin that don't have an impact on us. Those things that happen in Austin dramatically impact our day-to-day lives. So that's one thing that I will bring to this job, which I think is critical that my opponent can't bring. The other that I would say I bring is that, I have experienced suffering and loss in life. I mean, I've seen my family suffer from a lack of health care and loss of jobs. I myself have lost jobs and worry about what it's like to get a job. And I fought in community service programs to help people get back up on their feet, whether it's through legal issues or housing. I think our elected officials need to have an empathy. There's no room for arrogance in being a representative of your neighbors. You need to come to the table with empathy and a desire to help people with the challenges they face. I do that every day as a volunteer in my community, as an attorney who runs our pro bono programs. And so I will bring a mindset of people first, like my neighbors first, helping them, navigate the challenges they face and make the life they want for themselves and for their kids. That's something that I think also separates me from my opponent. So those are a couple of things that I think I point out.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, this is Jeff Whitfield, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and for everyone in my area, go out and vote for him. This has been a great time. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks, Carlos. And I'll give you my website again, just for folks who didn't catch the beginning. It's whitfieldfortexas.com, WHITFIELD Texas.com, and sure do hope I can earn your vote.
Thank you so much. And for everybody watching on my channel and any normal subscribers, I'm Carlos Hidalgo, and this is Phenom Philosophy.